Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger, as usual. We are counting down the days, literally the days. By this time next week, I may very well be a father. I know, we know within the next week or so, next 10 days or so, I'm definitely going to be a dad, but we go to the hospital on next Tuesday, so as of recording right now, it's Wednesday. In 7 days, I may be a first-time daddy. And I am excited to the point of tears that I get to meet my son. In days, only a few nights between now and meeting my son, and I will be able to reveal his name to everybody. And when I reveal his name to everybody listening to the podcast, it will all make sense. You'll say, well, of course that figures. I'll just tell you right now, no, my son's name is not going to be Marty. You can cross that one off the list. But once you hear his name, it will all make sense. So I am so stoked about that. Within the next few days, this is in line with the topic I want to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the 2022 Hummer, or the 2021 Hummer. When does GMC plan to come out with the new Hummer? I want to say, maybe it's 2021 for the first. No, it's 2022. 2022 for the first Hummer, which is going to be EV. Fully EV. So we're going to talk about specs on that and kind of my thoughts on the whole thing on General Motors getting into the EV game like this. I mean, they have the Bolt, they have the Volt, they have the Spark EV, they have a bunch of compliance cars. But the Hummer is not going to be a compliance car, meaning that they're not having to come out with these models to satisfy California or to meet the carbon footprint goals. Those are what compliance cars are. The Chevy Bolt is a compliance car. The Chevy Spark EV is a compliance car. The Chevy Volt is a compliance car. It's made to meet these new standards for vehicle production. You have to produce a certain amount of EVs every year now, and GM has had their compliance cars. The Hummer is not going to be that. The Hummer is going to be a flagship, but we'll talk about that in a moment. I wanted to briefly touch on, before we move on to the Hummer EV, that this Saturday is my last chance probably for a while to actually make my own EV dreams happen. I still want that Bolt EV, and I told you a few podcasts ago, this may be it. This weekend I may have the EV. To briefly summarize, if you didn't hear that podcast or the subsequent podcast, I didn't wind up getting the Bolt EV a couple weeks ago. They offered me something ridiculously low for my trade-in, for Rowdy, the 2010 Audi S5, because there wasn't a human being there to appraise it. I had to do it online. They said their appraisers had went home, and the online offer was just sickening. It was $2,000 less than what I was offered at a competing dealership. So anyways, I've been going through Rowdy and kind of buttoning her up, replacing light bulbs that are out. So I replaced the license plate light bulbs with LEDs. I replaced the fog lights with LEDs. I replaced some side markers with LEDs. It looks great. The lights on there look great. I have a VAGCOM scanner waiting for me at home so that I can reset the codes. The airbag and the airbag and the parking brake light have come on, which is a common fault after you do work to the car. Since I just replaced the computer, the airbag system and the parking brake system both need to have the codes cleared. The power driver seat is not going back and forth, but I have a feeling that that's all tied into the airbag and parking brake system, that if it senses that the airbags aren't right, then if it senses a code in the airbags, then maybe it won't let you move the power seat. Either way, this VAGCOM scanner that I scan can scan for things like those types of electronics, the car seat. If there's something wrong with the driver's side seat, it'll let me know. But I have this gut feeling that those errors are all kind of tied together. But anyways, Point is, I've been buttoning up Rowdy, giving her her best shot at trade in value when we meet with an actual human being appraiser. At least get the offer that I was offered at a competing dealership, which I didn't get in writing. I should have got in writing, but I didn't get it in writing. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going back on Saturday early enough to catch an appraiser and go over the car. And maybe, fingers crossed, this weekend I'll finally be in a used Chevy Bolt EV. The reason I'm trading, I wish I could keep Rowdy. I wish I could keep all of it. And honestly, I haven't done this yet, but I might go home tonight after recording and ask my wife, babe, is there any way we can keep both? And I will make an argument. Well, we can keep Rowdy on low mileage insurance. I have classic car insurance for the DeLorean, which is, basically $500 a year. I can go to effectively the same type of insurance for Rowdy if you're going to drive it less than, let's say, 5,000 miles per year here in the United States. And I'm sure it's the same abroad. You get a special type of really cheap insurance because if you're not going to be driving it that much, you should be paying all that insurance for it. So there are insurance packages like that are really cheap. And I'm going to bring up this idea just once with my wife, fully expecting the answer to be no, but we'll see. Because the whole thing here is replacing Rowdy with the Bolt, the EV, because one, I want to move to EV. I've explained it all. One, I want to move to EV. Two, just need a bigger car that can accommodate a child better, a child seat better. And we brought the child seat to the dealership. I have tested in the Bolt. I have test driven the Bolt with the car seat in there. It all fits beautifully. So if I can keep Rowdy, that'd be great. That was always my dream with Rowdy, knowing that a car of that specific nature is going to become more rare and more rare. A naturally aspirated V8 with a 6-speed manual transmission and 3 pedals is going to get increasingly rare. And I always kind of wanted to keep her as like the weekend hot rod, that when I moved to EV, I would still have the fast V8 there ready just to be driven once in a while, kind of like the DeLorean, just once in a while, just go have a rip. I would love to keep Rowdy. I don't think that's going to happen, but I will tenderly approach it with my wife, and I will report back to you next podcast with the answer of no. I'm not going to fight her on it. I'm just going to broach it. And I know how sweet and accommodating she is and logical and well thought out. If I pressed it hard, I know she would say, well, if you've thought about it and you can make it work and it's financially feasible and everything, if you think it's a good idea, I know she would be accommodating in that way. But at the same time, if she just says, no, we're not keeping, Daddy can't have 3 cars because Mommy already has 1. Daddy can't have 3 cars. It just doesn't make sense. Maybe she's not going to put it in the way of you can't have it. She's going to be the typical nurturing wife. Do you think that's a good idea? That's how it's going to go down. That's my guess. But it can't hurt to ask. Like my grandfather says, it can't hurt to talk. It can't hurt to ask. When there's no harm in asking your boss for a raise, for instance. The worst he can say is no. There's no harm in asking for a promotion. There's no harm in negotiating things. The worst that the counteroffer can be is just no. So I'm going to ask, is there a way we can keep Rowdy and get the Bolt? I'm probably going to convince myself out of that idea. Like, it's probably not even going to be a thing where I need to ask my wife. I'm probably just going to come to the conclusion, let's just be logical about this. There's no sense in keeping it. I would love for a family member or a friend to buy Rowdy, honestly. That way I can know where it is and take a rip in it whenever I want to. Well, not whenever I want to. It'd be their car, but have easier access to it, whatever. I'm probably just going to get rid of Rowdy. That's probably what it's all going to boil down to. If I'm just being realistic, coming full circle right here in my own podcast, I'm probably going to get rid of Rowdy. That just makes most logical sense. So Daddy's cars are going to be the DeLorean, which I will never, ever sell. That is a nest egg. That is going to my son, ideally, after I die. Daddy's going to have the DeLorean, which is ICE, obviously, internal combustion engine, and probably the daily drivers are going to be EV. My ultimate dream world, and we're going to talk about the Hummer in a second, my ultimate dream driveway, my dream garage and driveway would be DeLorean and Tesla Cybertruck. When the Cybertruck comes out, you know, who knows where I'll be. I've talked about this a little bit before. Who knows where my family will be financially when the Cybertruck comes out. And I mean when the Cybertruck comes out at the price point that is feasible. You know that when the Cybertruck comes out, there's no way it's going to hit that $45,000, sub $50,000 mark that Elon Musk says it will. There's freaking no way that the first generation of Cybertruck is going to be below, I'm going to guess, $60,000. If I was going to ballpark it, I would say the first Cybertruck, if we're freaking lucky, would be 70 grand out the door, even with tax incentives and all that. 70 grand. That it might come out, the first Cybertruck model available, probably going to be 80 grand if we're lucky. It's going to be around there. Just my guess. But by the time Cybertruck comes around and they have a more base model for around 45 grand-ish that Elon Musk has been promising, the Chevy Bolt I want to get into is probably going to be the interim vehicle, if that makes sense. So the garage now would be DeLorean in the garage, Bolt in the driveway until I could get a Cybertruck. Ultimate dream driveway, dream vehicle situation for me is the DeLorean and then a Cybertruck as the daily. Now, what was I going to say about that? The DeLorean, some of you might be wondering, and I want to let you know just kind of my thinking and rationale behind this, how I feel about it. The DeLorean, when I say I'm never going to get rid of it and I'm never going to sell it, it's because it is more than a car. It's like an art piece. It's like if someone's been after a specific piece of art. Happy Back to the Future Day, by the way, as I'm recording right now. Some of you might be wondering why I haven't mentioned that. Happy Back to the Future Day. This is the day in Back to the Future 2 when Marty went to 2015. So October 21st is when he went to 2015. I believe October 26th is when he went to 1985, because if you remember, he had to go a few days before. The 26th would be the 21st so that he could catch Biff giving himself the almanac and blah, blah, blah. We're not going to get too sidetracked by that. But happy Back to the Future Day. Back to the Future 2 when he went into 2015. Anyways, when I say I'm never going to get rid of Lauren the DeLorean, it's because it's not just a car in my mind. It's not a rotatable thing. It's not just a hunk of metal sitting there. It's a very nostalgic, very important piece of history to me, and I love history. So it's not just that it's a car. There's a lot of car people, and I know this because I've in the past I've had Matt Farah from the Smoking Tire on the show. He had a DeLorean also briefly. And he loved the car. He still loves the DeLorean, period. He's kind of a champion for the car. He's a defender of the car. But he got the car, and what he told me in the podcast, and maybe I'll link it below. It's an early podcast, so it's pretty oof. But anyways, if I'll find it, I'll link it in the podcast description. What he told me in the podcast description, I asked him why he got rid of the DeLorean, or that part of the conversation came about. And it came down to the fact that he thought that he gets just as much joy from the DeLorean seeing a painting of it on his wall, which he does have a painting of a DeLorean. He says he got just as much joy painting it as he did owning it. That his love affair with the DeLorean was really kind of the history and how it looks. And it was his dream car as a kid, and now he had his dream car, and he realized that he wouldn't drive it as much as he thought, he wouldn't enjoy driving it as much as he thought he would, that his love of it is purely aesthetic, which means that he is the type of person, and there are other DeLorean owners out there who have had DeLoreans and have gotten rid of DeLoreans and maybe go through DeLoreans, maybe they have several different VIN numbers of DeLoreans, that they're not really attached to a DeLorean specifically, or they're not too attached to the DeLorean specifically. They don't have all the nostalgia that I do. They don't have the love affair with the car that I do that makes me want to keep it. And I've had it for 20 years, which is insane to think about. I've had it since July of the year 2000. I've had it since Y2K. 20 years. That's most of my life. I'm 37. 20 years is most of my life. I've had it since I was 17 years old. It's so much more than a rotator car. Do you know what I mean by that? People have their daily driver, and then they have a car that they just kind of rotate. They're car nuts, they're car guys, they're car girls, and they say, okay, I want to have a 1967 Mustang, and I have that for a few years, and they get rid of it, and then they get another car in its place. They get another bucket list car. Okay, now I've had the Lotus Esprit for a few years. I'm kind of done with my affair with the Lotus Esprit. I'll get rid of the Lotus Esprit. Now I'll get the Audi R8 that I've always wanted. Now I have the Audi R8 and they keep trading cars. You know what I'm saying? They keep like recycling their bucket list car. The DeLorean is not just a bucket list car. It was a lifelong dream up until the point of getting it when I was 17 years old for less than a used Honda Civic. And it remains the same dream, if not more so now, to keep it. I have not lost my interest in my passion for the DeLorean. It has only been strengthened. The love for it has only strengthened because it has gone so far beyond oil and gasoline and stainless steel and fiberglass. It has become so much more. And if something happened to it, I would feel bad. And I'm struggling, if you can't already tell, I'm struggling not to equate it to human life. I'm struggling not to equate it to the love somebody would have for a sister or a brother or a son or a daughter, because I know I have been feeling my son kicking in my wife's room. There's nothing more important than that. There's nothing in my life that will ever compare to it. There's no material possession on earth that is as important as a family member. As much as I love Lauren the DeLorean, I've named her. By the way, everybody's ship should have a female name. That's just tradition. So Rowdy is a female. Lauren the DeLorean is a female. Every vessel should have a female name. But there's nothing more important than human life and relationships between two humans bonding. So as much as I love Lauren the DeLorean, and as much as I would never sell it, and as much of a part of my life it has become, I would shove it off a cliff if my son was diagnosed with cancer or anything like that. If we needed that money to free up that money, it's worth a lot more now than it was when I bought it. I did good buying the DeLorean for what I bought it for in the year 2000. For how much it's appreciated, I've done well. It would not make me rich. It would not make our family wealthy. Not by any. You can go online to see how much DeLoreans are going for, even like the cheapest ones. You can see how much they're going for. I've done well in that investment. And as much as I love it, as much as I can love a thing, I would shove it off a cliff, push it off a cliff. I would detonate it with 2 tons of dynamite. In some, if that was to help my son if he was diagnosed with some sort of illness and we needed the money. That's one reason why I will never get rid of it, never sell it, is because it's kind of like I don't know what my career is going to do. I don't know what my wife's career is going to do, but it's always kind of the safety net. I know there's money there. There's equity there. There's an investment there. So it's not just that I wouldn't get rid of it out of attachment to it. It's just financially, I'm not going to get rid of it because it's a safety net. It's a tool that I can use in a dire situation to help my family, to help my son, to help my wife, to help any member of my family. So unless something happens career-wise, unless you start hearing a bunch of sponsors on the Geek Therapy Radio podcast and it becomes a lot bigger than it is, and it's growing, and I appreciate that. I friggin' love all of you for listening and sharing it with your friends. I adore you from the bottom of my heart for doing that. But if it becomes a lot bigger and there is more financial freedom, then yes, I would like to have 3 cars. The DeLorean stays, and then my daily driver, and then like the third. That's the only point at which I would have the third rotator car, where I'd be like, okay, bucket list time, Lotus Esprit, Audi R8. What else is on my bucket list? Another MR2, every generation of MR2. And I would just rotate. I would not have them all at the same time. I'd be rotating them out. You know, I'm kind of over the Lotus Esprit, if that even makes sense. I'll do the R8 now. I'm kind of over the R8. I want to go back to an old Volkswagen Beetle. Have the Beetle. So I just have this rotator if I was financially able to. Anyways, let's move on to the Hummer. And you know what I'm going to do? We're 20 and a half minutes or so into the podcast. I'm going to go ahead and insert the ad here. I'm obligated to insert an ad. As always, disclaimer, I do not necessarily endorse whatever you're about to hear. And some of you don't hear it. Some apps that I play back my podcast in, because I've tested this, don't play the ads. They don't play the ad at the beginning, they don't play the ad at the end, and they don't play the ad that I am forced to insert into the middle of the podcast. So if you hear the ad here, I do not necessarily endorse whatever you're about to hear. But let's go ahead and get it out of the way and move on to the 2022 Hummer. And we're back. Thank you for joining me. Oh boy, what's going on outside the studio door? Someone's dragging a chair around out there. Okay, so we're moving on to the 22 GMC Hummer EV. And first, I will tell you that what we're about to get into here in a few moments had me so butthurt today. I was catching myself. I'm like, why am I so butthurt over all of this? So I'll explain the butthurt. And eventually, first we're going to go over the specs, then I'll explain the butthurt, and then we'll kind of delve into why I kind of started answering my own questions. I started thinking logically, because you know what I say on my show from time to time. I try to remind listeners that the more emotional response that something elicits from you is a big red flag, is a reminder that we need to take a step back and be logical. That means if you see something posted, I'm not getting sidetracked, I promise. If you see something posted on Facebook or Twitter or some sort of piece that's supposed to elicit an emotional rise out of you, that should be your first indication to data this thing, to Spock this thing, to take some emotion out of it for a second and be logical about it. If you're getting worked up, that's your first clue. Hey, whoa, I'm getting too worked up over this. Let's take a step back and be logical. And I was reminding myself about this, going round and round in my head after being butthurt by the GMC Hummer EV. And I started to kind of answer my own questions, but we'll get into that. So first, let's do the specs. 2022, the 2022 GMC Hummer EV truck. 1,000 horsepower. I'll save the price for later. 1,000 horsepower for the, I'm assuming, top trim Hummer EV, 2022 Hummer EV, which, by the way, is the first and only trim that GMC is going to offer in 2022. They will offer subsequent cheaper trims of the Hummer EV as the years go on, but at first launch, it's going to be the 1,000 horsepower Hummer EV. And I'll just tell you right now, the price is it's supposed to be $112,000. $112,000. Now, that's a lot of money. By any stretch of the imagination, it is a lot of money. The Cybertruck we were just talking about, Elon Musk hopes to have that around $45,000. I'm going to guess it's going to be, when it first comes out, it's going to be 20 to 40 grand less. 20 to 30 probably grand less than the Hummer EV when the Cybertruck comes out. So it's a lot of money. $112,000. Actually, technically, it's $112,595, and you can start pre-ordering it now. I don't know why you would, but you can start pre-ordering it now. I'm going to save on the butthurt for a minute, and let's just keep going over specs. I had briefly, it feels like I only did this a couple months ago in a podcast, gone over the speculative specs. That sounds weird. Speculative specifications of the Hummer EV. We talked about it having up to 3 motors, electric motors, totaling horsepower, about 1,000 horsepower or 745 kilowatts. Did I just burp while I was talking? Of course I did. 0 to 60 time of around 3.5 seconds. What was GM's official branding in their commercial? It said 0 to 60 in the 3 to 4 second range or something, like 3-second range. It didn't give anything specific. It just said on their own commercial on TV, 0 to 60, 3-second range, which it was kind of weird. But anyways, it is still a big car. It's not as big. I don't have the exact specs on the OG Hummer, the H1 Hummer, the real actual military use Hummer, because then we got the H2. And did we get an H3 or something? We got some stupid Hummers. Ridiculous. Glasses off my face now, rubbing my eyes. Stupid Hummers. Oh, I am butthurt about that. What was it? The Hummer was like on a Tahoe frame, or was it smaller than that? Just ridiculous. Gas guzzling, horrible, atrocious, douchebag only driving. And I'm getting emotional. I should check myself, be logical. But I'm sorry, I'm going to let myself go a little bit. Only D-bags drove anything but an H1 Hummer, and we can debate back and forth whether a D-bag would get an H1 Hummer, but I would argue that somebody who's driving an H1 Hummer, like the military style Hummer, is a big-time geek about Hummers, and that's why they got an H1 Hummer, and the person who bought the H2 Hummer or any variant afterwards was a friggin' poser. That's not a geek. Being a poser is not a geek. Driving a big car because you think chicks will dig it. A big, gaudy, cheap, disgusting monstrosity of a thing because you think chicks love is so stupid. Is poser. That's not being a geek. It's poser. I will be nice here and punctuate that thought with maybe there is somebody out there who is actually a geek about an H2 Hummer. Maybe. And if so, more power to you. I'm just being feisty. More power to you if you like those mid-range, middle ground, mid-era Hummers. I don't. And I can't imagine there's too many people out there genuinely geeking out. Like they bought an H2 Hummer back when it first came out in the mid-2000s or whatever it came out. And they're like, I'm keeping this truck forever. This is my dream truck. I'm keeping it forever. No. I don't think there's hardly anybody out there who wanted to keep that plastic piece of crap, gaudy looking thing forever. There are people out there absolutely who want to keep that H1 forever, and absolutely a geek about the military style Hummer, the true original gangster OG Hummer for sure. Anyways, back to the 2022 Hummer. More specs. The torque. The torque is kind of an interesting discussion. So we've determined 1,000 horsepower or 745 kilowatts, 0 to 60 around 3 seconds, $112,000, closer to $113,000. Let's just be real here. It's 260.8 inches long, which is slightly shorter than the Cadillac Escalade. It's 86.7 inches wide. That doesn't count the mirrors. Or 93.7 inches, including the mirrors. And 81.1 or so inches tall. It's a big car. It's a big car, and it's probably very heavy as well, especially given the batteries inside of there. So the 2022 Hummer EV is going to be the first of General Motors products to use their Ultium batteries in the Ultium drive motor. I touched on this a few months ago when I very briefly touched on the upcoming Hummer EV. So we knew that was coming, the ultimate drive motor, the Ultium batteries. That is going to be a tri-motor. And when we get to the torque output, that's where it gets kind of funny and interesting. So GMC says that it has, now I'm not stuttering when I say this, I am not misspeaking when I say this. GMC says that the 2022 Hummer EV has 11,500 foot-pounds of torque. 11,500 foot-pounds of torque. Some say, and I'm reading Ars Technica article summing this up, that is at the wheels, which it seems like at the wheels, the gear reduction to get 11,500 pound-feet of torque at the wheels, the gear reduction must be insane. At the motor, GMC says that the actual torque is around 1,000 foot-pounds of torque, which is still mind-boggling. I'm going to go, and I don't know how to think about this, and I just gotta say right now and admit we don't have the Hummer EV yet. No one has been able to test the Hummer EV yet. We don't have the final production-ready Hummer EV yet, and we won't until at least 2022. So what do these numbers mean? 11,500 foot-pounds of torque at the wheels, but 1,000 foot-pounds at the motor, and through gear reduction and stuff, you can up or down the torque. You people know, engineers know how gear reduction and gears work on torque. Think of a mountain bike. For those of you who aren't engineers, think about a mountain bike, how you switch through the gears so that you can pedal a lot, your legs move a lot, so that you can go uphill just really slow. So you're using a lot of motion through gear reduction to produce a lot of torque on the back wheel, versus when you're flat out, you're already up at speed, and you shift the gear selector on the mountain bike down so that every time you do one rotation with your feet, the back tire spins like 10 times. That would be like a 10-to-1 gear reduction, a lot less torque. That's kind of where horsepower comes into play, when you're at speed and you're moving the engine at that kind of gear reduction to whatever. That's horsepower and torque. Torque is down low. Horsepower keeps it pushing through when you get those higher gears. Won't get into all of that. So I'm interested to see what is this 11,500 foot-pounds of torque and 1,000 foot-pounds of torque actually mean. Either way, if all it has is 1,000 foot-pounds of usable torque, that's still astonishing. That torque is what makes the 0 to 60 time so low in the 3-second range. In a Hummer, 3 seconds range in a Hummer. We know it's going to be below 4 seconds in a Hummer. The 0 to 60 isn't the most important thing to a lot of people. The most important thing is going to be the range. And here's where things also get kind of silly for me, and where I kind of rack my brain and have questions about this. First of all, it's built on an 800-volt architecture. And the range is going to be about this is what GM claims, 350 miles or 564 kilometers. So a 350-mile range, 800-volt architecture, and it allows fast charging at up to 350 kilowatts, which equals about 100 miles of range per 10 minutes of charging. Awesome, awesome, awesome. That's really cool. Where I'm confused, though, is this range, 350 miles of range. And why that's confusing me is that Chevy says the battery pack, where is this? So as a kind of baseline, the Chevy Bolt that I'm interested, the used Chevy Bolt that I'm interested, has a 60 kilowatt hour battery pack. The new Chevy Bolts, the 2020 Chevy Bolts, have a 66 kilowatt hour battery pack. So let's use that figure from the 60 kilowatt, the used Chevy Bolt that I'm after. 60 kilowatt hours in a Chevy Bolt gets you around 300. There are users that are getting around 300 miles of range out there. Officially, the EPA estimates are averaging 238 miles of range for a first-generation Chevy Bolt. And the new generation, the 2020, which has 6 extra kilowatts in the battery pack, that range goes up from 238 to like 258. But even on the first-generation Bolts, many owners are getting around and over, sometimes way over 300 miles of range out of that 60 kilowatt hour battery pack. Now, the Hummer EV obviously is going to be a much bigger car, almost probably twice the weight of a Chevy Bolt, so it's going to have larger battery packs. And I keep missing where it says what the size of the battery pack is. That's what I'm looking for here. Let me vamp for a second until I find it. Maybe it's been redacted since the last time, or edited. No. So here it is. I found it. 350 miles of range, and GM says the battery pack would total 200 kilowatt hours. 350 miles of range from a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack. That must mean that the Hummer EV is just monstrously heavy. But even that said, what is the Tesla truck? The Tesla truck is going to have an upper range models like 600 miles of range. I don't think it's a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack. If it is a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack or that kind of neighborhood for the Tesla truck, yeah, it would make sense for 600. So what I'm confused about here is, because I'm not an expert in this, obviously, is how is the math between, let's just say, the Chevy Bolt using a 60 kilowatt hour battery pack and getting 300 miles of range. A lot of people getting 300 miles of range from 60 kilowatt hours. And then the Hummer, even though it's bigger and heavier, only getting 350 miles of range from a battery pack that's like 2.5 times as big. 350 miles of range from a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack, because we don't have everything in front of us right now. We don't have actual range estimates. We don't have any tests for it. That seems low. 350 miles of range from 200 kilowatt hours, even in a big, heavy Hummer, seems ridiculously low to me. Does that kind of math trouble anybody else, or does it give anybody else pause? Because it makes me kind of question. It's just weird. It seems to me that 200 kilowatt hours of storage, of battery pack capacity, should equal a lot more than 350 miles of range. So the math doesn't quite add up. But again, we'll see. And that's not even what has me butthurt about this. So if you wait until, according to this, 2024 is when GM hopes to have a Hummer EV squared EV. Oh, no. Sorry, just the Hummer EV model at a base price of $80,000. That at launch in 2022, it'll be $112,000, almost $113,000. But by 2024, they should have models starting at $79,995. Very expensive. Very, very expensive. And here's where I got butthurt earlier and just was so questionably emotional about all this. And by that, I mean I wasn't like throwing computers around or, oh, my plane crashed in Flight Simulator. I wasn't like throwing computers and mices around and mouse pads and keyboards and all that. I wasn't doing that thinking about the Hummer. But I was just a little bit, it wasn't making sense in my mind. I was just pissed. And here's why. I don't know the decision-making process at GM that makes them think a $112,000 car is going to somehow break them into the EV market in earnest. Like, oh, we're going to come out with the $112,000 flagship Hummer EV. That's going to be our first offering. That's going to put us on the map, saying we're really serious about our EV future. It's going to be an elitist priced $112,000, $113,000 before markup for this 2022 Hummer. The other question is, do they actually think they're going to sell that many at this price? Is there going to be a market? Because there's a few things that still need education for the public, I'll just say. Range anxiety is becoming less of a thing, but there's still a concern of infrastructure. Even though the infrastructure is getting better and better, I don't think the typical General Motors buyer, the same person interested in a Hummer, is probably not going to be the most up-to-date on how good the electric infrastructure is, or how good battery packs are, or how range anxiety shouldn't be a consideration anymore. I don't think they're going to be the most well-versed. So, GM, and I've harped on this so many times, if they're going to come out with a car in earnest, even if it's a $113,000 monster elitist type of car, the marketing for the Hummer needs to also include education, a lot of education. It needs to include a whole lot of language about Electrify America and EVgo and all these charging stations and level 3 chargers, and are there going to be level 4 chargers? Whatever. They're going to need to educate the General Motors buyer. So what I mean by the General Motors buyer is not just the person who's going to buy a Hummer. It's the person who's in there to buy a pickup truck, who just goes to the General Motors dealership because they want to they want to get like a Chevy Silverado, or they want to get a dually, or they want to get some sort of pickup truck. That type of person, and I'm not classing everybody in the same boat, but that kind of typical, general, stereotypical truck buyer, GM buyer, is not on the same level of education about EVs as a Tesla buyer would be. Do you get what I'm saying? The person who's going for a Tesla has already done a whole lot of homework and has already come to the conclusion in their head that a Tesla, that an EV makes all the sense in the world to them, that it's something viable now. A typical truck buyer or SUV buyer for GM, there's an increased likelihood that they are not going to be up to that level yet. So in my opinion, for General Motors to have their best chance at actually selling this thing, they're going to have to include a whole lot of education along with the marketing. They can't just show the Hummer EV like jumping over sand dunes and chugging its way up a mountain and towing a bunch of boats and stuff. They have to educate people on how to use this vehicle, because a lot of them who are going to buy it, what they're hoping are they're going to be switching from a typical internal combustion engine truck or a diesel truck to an EV. And that segment needs education. I'm not calling them dumb. I'm just saying that they've never thought about an EV before, and they may not have done a lot of homework on the EV. They just need to educate the buyer of what the EV is, what it can do, and how they can charge it, and why it makes sense to purchase and live with this thing. And if GM doesn't do that, if all they do is have ads saying 0 to 60 time in 3 seconds and show it going up a mountain and stuff like that, but they don't include any education on the practicality of owning it and how to charge it up and where to charge it up, and that there will be available chargers all across the nation, that they can drive from New York City to Los Angeles, it won't be a problem. If they don't include a lot of that language and a lot of that education in the advertising, they're going to have a $113,000 dud. Remember, the Cybertruck is supposed to come out about the same time. So it's going to have competition from an established EV automaker that is, let's just be honest, so far out ahead of the EV game than the big three automakers are. Tesla is just run away with the electric vehicle game. Just run away with it. Elon Musk's goal was to spark the EV revolution, and auto manufacturers have been like 10 years behind. Like a decade behind. They didn't take it seriously. And now EVs and Tesla, they see how well it's doing, and they're thinking, well, we need to get in this game now too. And GM is stepping up, and Volkswagen is stepping up, and all the big three manufacturers are kind of stepping up. Way late. Better late than never, but way late. And their customer base is not clued in to the benefits or the realities of going EV. So if GM and Volkswagen and all of them want to sell these models, let's stick with GM. If GM wants to sell the Hummer, they have to include all that education in the marketing. 2 years before we ever see the Hummer on the road, before they ever start leaving showrooms, they have to educate over the next 2 years on what EVs are, and that you don't have to be afraid of them, and that they're not going to kill the economy, and that you're not going to run out of battery halfway down the interstate because you think you can only go 20 miles and it works like a golf cart, and it only goes 12 miles like a golf cart does. It's going to have to include education. The other thing that got me all riled up and butthurt is if General Motors, or Ford for that matter, Ford has the Mach-E, the Mustang Mach-E, which don't even get me started on naming that. And I'm trying not to get butthurt over the Ford Mach-E. The thing about the Mach-E, here I go. The thing about the Mach-E is it's not a bad car. It's not a bad crossover SUV type thing. But calling it a Mustang? Are you kidding me? Why? Because people know the name Mustang. What should they call it? Oh, what was it? There was a clever name that I thought they should have called it. SUVE or SUEV or something like that. There was a clever name. E-Explorer. That was it. Just call it the E-Explorer. They already have a Ford Explorer. Just call it the Ford E-Explorer. instead of the Mustang Mach-E. Stupid. Ford E-Explorer is so much more clever and so much better. But we're not here to talk about the Ford E-Explorer, the Mustang Mach-E. We're here to talk about the General Motors Hummer EV. The biggest reason I was butthurt is if General Motors wanted to be earnest about their venture into EV market, if they wanted to say, we're here, we've got EVs, Tesla isn't the only name of the game now, we are offering an EV for the masses, it wouldn't be $112,000. And it wouldn't be a Hummer. If GMC was serious about changing the hearts and minds of Americans and the rest of the world, wherever they offer their products, about EVs, about electric vehicles, and try to sell as many of them as they possibly can, they wouldn't have come out with a Hummer EV right out the gate. Part of me understands why for an image thing, but if they actually, it seems to me like I don't understand this decision. Hey, we want to sell a lot of cars. Let's come out with a $113,000 Hummer EV. Let's show the world why we're serious about EV. Okay, the first thing we offer, $113,000. I don't understand it. The first vehicle that General Motors should have offered, the first truck that General Motors should have offered as an EV should have been the GMC Sierra. It should have been their bread and butter pickup truck. You can buy a brand new GMC Sierra right now for under $30,000. It's like $29,700. That is completely baseline. That's completely base trim. Cloth, I mean, it's base, $30,000. That's a working man's or a working woman's, let's be equal here, truck. That is their bread and butter workhorse truck. They should have come out the gates with the 2022 GMC Sierra EV and priced it. The most expensive Sierra is I think the Sierra Denali, and I'm looking at the GMC website right now. Sierra Denali, as shown, $66,920, which I know a lot of you listening around the world, $67,000 for a pickup truck. Are you crazy? Yeah, Americans, we have a lot of $70,000 driveway queens out there. Let me tell you that the people who buy them, they buy these big rough and ready trucks for $70,000. They don't want to touch them with mud. It's ridiculous. So yeah, a $70,000 truck. So GM should have come out with a model of GMC Sierra EV and just priced it below $70,000. I know that is easier said than done. I know that's easier said than done. But GM should have at least tried, should have at least put forth the effort to make their bread and butter, their iconic GMC Sierra an EV, offered an EV model of the GMC Sierra, if they were really serious about selling as many EVs as possible. So here's how I see it kind of playing out. And I'm not an expert. This is just me, a guy with a podcast and a radio show, just giving my opinion, trying to wrap his own brain around all of this. Maybe they're going with the Hummer EV as their debut kind of world-class EV, non-compliance car. They're just a dedicated EV showing off their new Ultium motors and Ultium batteries and all that. Maybe they're going with that and at that price point because they know they couldn't possibly sell the volume of GMC Sierra EVs at under $70,000, because if they did, people would be clamoring to the dealerships to buy effectively the first electric pickup truck in the United States. Just a normal pickup truck. I'm looking out across the parking lot here at the radio station at a Ford. It looks like an F-250 or a F-150 long bed or something like that out there. It's just a normal pickup truck. Part of the problem with EV adoption has been, in addition to manufacturing and everything like that, I know a lot of people are screaming at the speakers right now, it's hard to manufacture. They can't manufacture 100,000, EVs a day like they manufacture 100,000 pickup trucks. I get that. But one of the biggest problems EVs have faced in their adoption is that it seemed like there wasn't anything offered that was actually usable. But I can only speak for the United States. There wasn't anything offered that was actually usable by Americans. Yes, we still drive sedans here in the United States. Just to be brutally honest, the most popular market segment right now for all vehicles ever in the United States right now is the compact SUV. And there was no EV offering for a compact SUV. And I think maybe that's because the big three automakers, GM, Ford, Chrysler, I think they were afraid that if they actually did offer an EV pickup truck or an EV crossover, that they couldn't possibly produce enough. Also, that it was not profitable. Their compliance cars were not profitable. When you buy a Chevy Bolt, General Motors is losing. Their estimates was like $5,000. If you're walking out the door for no matter what the sale price, even if you bought it full price, $43,000, General Motors was still losing $5,000. They had to build these cars to comply with the emissions regulations. They were extremely expensive to build. They lose money on every single Bolt and Volt and Spark EV that you buy. So why would they make a crossover where they would have the problem of selling 500,000 of them? They would lose money on 500,000 cars. So yes, I know the logic in me, the Spock in me, the Commander Data in me is saying, well, Johnny, you're getting butthurt over the Hummer EV being General Motors' first genuine, like all in-house EV offering. But the reality is, Johnny, that they can't sell 500,000 GMC Sierra EVs for less than $70,000. That even if they did build a GMC Sierra EV, it would still probably, for them to make a profit on it, it would still cost around $100,000. But the emotional side comes back. The skeptic side a little bit comes back and says, is that true? Is that true? And that maybe we won't get the answer to that for a long time. Can General Motors genuinely not produce a basic GMC Sierra EV for less than $70,000 and have it stay profitable? Like, could they come out with a $40,000 GMC Sierra EV and make a couple grand off of it? Like, could they be profitable making that? And the logic side of me, again, comes back around and says, Johnny, I don't think they can. I think the reason why it's the Hummer and it can only be the Hummer and it can only be an elite class of vehicle for the extremely well-heeled, and why it has to be a flagship car like the Hummer is because they simply cannot make that much of a profit off of selling a pickup truck for under $50,000. An EV pickup truck. So if it's got to be something expensive, it's going to be expensive anyway. Might as well make it a Hummer. Bring back the Hummer. Bring back the flagship. And I think that's the reason, just because they can't make much of a profit off it right now. That it's going to take another few years. I think it's going to be the logic in me, the logical side of me saying, I think it's going to be another 4 or 5 years before we see that electric GMC Sierra or just an all-electric Chevy Malibu sedan, if we even see a sedan anymore. If we see an all-electric General Motor, what's the Arcadia, that SUV, kind of mid-sized SUV thing, that the normal cars won't be electric for probably 4 to 5 more years. What I hope, though, and I'll start wrapping up the podcast with this, what I hope, though, is that the Hummer EV sells well. If I was in the market for that, I would still go Cybertruck. And I think that's one of the hurdles that General Motors has, is that if someone's going to go to pickup truck, the EV population, the person who's already up to date in all the EVs, already knows about the Cybertruck, and they're already have their heart set on the Cybertruck. You're going to have to try to convince the normal GM buyer why they should spend $113,000 on a Hummer EV. So I hope the problem that GM doesn't have is 4 or 5 years from now, when they're thinking about offering other EV models, that they say, well, the Hummer EV didn't really sell, and we don't know why. It's obvious that the American public just isn't ready for a Hummer EV. This $113,000 truck didn't sell. Gee whiz, that just means that we're bust on EV. We can't do it. There's no market for it. I hope that's not the lesson that General Motors takes. The real lesson, the only way we can learn a marketing lesson, that General Motors can learn the actual marketing lesson, is there an actual market for EVs for real, is once they start offering for real cars that are EV. If they start offering the GMC Sierra baseline pickup truck with an EV option. If they start offering the Malibu sedan with an EV option. That's the only way you're going to be able to pull whether or not the American public is ready and the infrastructure is ready to go all in on EV. We're not going to know. We're not going to know by the sales numbers of the Hummer EV whether or not the American public is ready for it, because only rich people can afford that. That's not a good polling. That's not a good kind of, segment of data to pull that'll let us know whether the American public is ready for an EV. So one more time, the only way we know if the American public is ready for an EV, and to some extent global public, but let's focus on American public right now because I'm in Texas, pickup truck country. We're not going to know if the American public is ready for an EV until they come out with just normal, pre-existing models of vehicle that they offer also an EV. So GMC Sierra will have, you'll be able to choose your V6, your V8, or you want to go with the EV trim level. Only then will we know whether Americans are ready to adopt EV, because that would also mean that the public is educated on EV, that they're driving around enough, they're seeing enough commercials during whatever, that they're educated on, I can charge up this EV anywhere. There's more charging stations going up. I can recharge 100 miles per 10 minutes. It's not even about that kind of fast charging. I have to train my mind to plug in my car like I plug in my phone. You're going to have to re-educate people. Once the public is educated, and then you have a base model of vehicle, a normal vehicle that's also EV, then we're going to know. But we're not going to know just on the Hummer EV alone. It's cool, but will it sell? I don't know. There's so many questions around the Hummer EV. Would I like to drive one? Yes. Absolutely. Would I like to see them driving around the road here in Houston? Oh, absolutely. Be one of the coolest things ever to see going down the road. Cybertruck would look cooler. I would much rather have a Cybertruck, but I would love to see them. Time will tell. I'll do a podcast in 2 or 3 years from now, how well the Hummer EV is doing. Maybe there's going to be other models of General Motors EV. We know that Volkswagen's coming out with the ID3 here in America. They should also offer the ID4, which is the Golf replacement. A hatchback EV would be glorious from Volkswagen. But we get the friggin' mini crossover ID3 thing here first. I get it. I get it that those little crossovers, little eggs on wheels. The Chevy Bolt is an egg on wheels. It's a little mini crossover type thing. I know that those are the most popular sellers. The next 5 years we're going to get, next 3 to 5 years, we're going to be getting a lot more normal models of EV vehicles. It's no longer just going to be the Tesla Elite. We're going to see more normal vehicles, and they're going to be non-compliance cars. They're going to be actual cars that the automakers are coming out with for profit, that they're going to get the manufacturing numbers up enough, the supply and demand, to where that they can actually profit off of EVs now. I would imagine that General Motors is trying to profit off of the Hummer EV. I would hope that they're trying to profit off the Hummer EV, which is one reason why it's $113,000. Original Hummers, H1s and stuff were over $100,000 too, and that was back in like the 90s. So the $113,000 price point for the Hummer isn't so much of a huge issue, but it's just, like I mentioned at the beginning, the same type of person buying the Hummer H1 for over $100,000 is now going to have to be convinced to buy the new generation of electric Hummer for the same price. It's going to be very, very iffy, but fascinating. Thank you so much for listening to Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I think this kind of 2 show a week thing is probably going to be the way forward. You might see some extra episodes, but I think it's going to be minimum 2 a week. That being said, I'm about to have my baby in the next few days. I'm very excited. I don't know. I'm going to do the show that I record for the weekend for the radio show. That's going to be the next podcast for sure. That's coming. I'm going to record that later this week. But next week, Tuesday's go time, baby. So will I record a midweek geek? Probably not. A Geek Therapy Radio on Wednesday like I usually do? Probably not. I'm going to be in the hospital. And probably not going to feel like recording a podcast while my wife is having contractions. Which begs the question, we going to get out of the hospital? I'm going to have enough time to record them for the next weekend? Or will I pre-record? We'll see. I'm just saying, schedule of Geek Therapy Radio podcasts might get a little bit jumbled over the next 2 weeks. Don't abandon me. I'm just having a baby's all. But stay tuned for that. I can't wait to tell you all his name. Can't wait. Thank you so much for listening to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. You are worthy of love, no matter what. Please, if you take anything away from these podcasts, please know that you are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love, and you are worthy of receiving love. You are also worthy of your own self-confidence and your own self-respect. Lean into your geek thing. Embrace your geek thing. Go to geektherapyradio.com hold on. Go to geektherapyradio.com if you want more information on Geek Therapy Radio. If you want to contact me, the first thing you see on geektherapyradio.com is that contact form. If you want to support me on Patreon, it would help me buy diapers, and Lord knows I'm going to need it coming up here soon. Just no matter what you do, if all you do is listen to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast and then you share it with your friend, or if all you're doing is listening, I am honored that you're doing that much. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you guys so soon. Take care.